Hey everybody, this is Paige from Mosaic Moments, and today I'm going to be doing a demo of a very easy 2-page spread. You just need the basic die bundle to do this one. So it is going to be slower paced, so you are welcome to follow along and create your own layout as well. So let's go ahead and get started. For today's spread, I am going to be using page pattern number 529. You can see all of our patterns for free on mosaicmoments.com/patterns. And to make it easy, instead of looking for a second layout that could go with this one, I am just going to mirror it. So that's one easy way to create a 2-page spread is by mirroring the first pattern. Just keep in mind this works best with asymmetrical patterns. Today I'm using the Sizzix Big Shot as my die machine today. And I'm grabbing the second largest die from set C. And you should know an easy way to organize your dies is by separating the dies that fit the grid and the dies that layer on top of those sizes. I do have a video you can click on the top right that explains what the layering dies are in case you're not familiar with them. So it's important to differentiate between the dies that fit the measurements of our grid paper and then the other dies are so you can mat photos on top. So just now I cut through a piece of cardstock and I'm going to flip this die plate over. It helps to keep it from bending in the middle, to flip it around every other cut or every cut, I should say. And I'm going to place the die in there again. And as you can see, I have a piece of paper that's a little bit larger than the die, and you want to make sure that the die is not going over the paper because then it might cut crooked or part of it will come out shorter. So make sure you have a good piece of paper that the die will completely cover. And I'm also making sure both of my plates, I have a magnetic plate on the very bottom, and then I have my two plastic plates from Sizzix, and I'm making sure all the plates are straight. Sometimes what happens is they will turn a little bit in the machine if they're a little bit crooked. So avoid getting crooked die cuts. You want to make sure all your plates are going straight through, and also make sure your hand is planted down really well on the plates when it goes through the machine to avoid the plates from shifting. So I just put die set C away, and now I'm taking the second largest die from set A. This covers 4x4 squares on the grid paper. So I'm flipping over that plate again, and I have another piece of paper that's a little bit larger than the die itself, and I'm making sure that die does not, or excuse me, it covers that paper entirely so it doesn't accidentally get cut in a crooked way. And I do have, we talk about this a lot on the channel, but I do have my dies placed in an angle because the die machines cut using a lot of pressure, and we find that placing your dies in at an angle distribute that pressure better versus if you were to put it all the way straight through, and we find the cuts are cleaner and better when you place the dies in at an angle. So if you haven't tried that yet, try it the next time you use your die machine. Next, I'm using the second largest die from set B. So you probably notice I keep using the second largest die in each set. And I'm flipping that die plate over again, placing my piece of paper down, and then the die will go on top. Again, made sure the cardstock is a little bit bigger than the die to make sure that it'll cut properly. And the die is also placed in at an angle, and I'm holding my hand over the plates. So I'm just sharing some of my tips today to make sure you get the best cuts when using our dies. So far I finished cutting the pieces I want with the light brown, I guess that was sort of a tannish, I don't know, really light brown tannish paper. And now I'm going to cut the same exact pieces again with this dark cocoa brown paper. So I'm going to go ahead and cut all these, and I'll be back in a moment. Alright, so I just finished cutting my cardstock, and that cardstock will be the mats for my photographs. And now I'm going to cut my pattern paper. So this is the 2x4 die in set B. So it's not the smallest one, it's the second to smallest die in that set. And I have this really fun pattern paper here, and I really love the reindeer head. I really want to show that on my page, so I'm going to choose the spot I want to show on my layout. And on this paper, there's quite a bit going on, so it's just a matter of where to pick it. As you can see, I decided on this spot. I'm just cutting around it with scissors just so that it can fit into the die machine because I don't want to bend up the rest of the paper, right? And I'm flipping over my plate again. You have to kind of try to remember that because after a bit, if you have it on the same side every time, it's definitely going to start bending in the middle. So I have my die placed on top of the pattern paper. If you need, you can use washi tape if there's a particular spot on the pattern paper you need and you don't want the design to look crooked. Even though I'm using magnetic plate, which can help, but sometimes with the Sizzix plates, the die ends up shifting anyway, so that's something to be aware of even if you are using the magnetic plate. Alright, so I got the piece and I need 2 pieces with this same die, so I'm going to choose another spot, and I really wanted to show these snowmen snow globes, so I'm gonna use my scissors to make a smaller shape of pattern for the pattern paper so that way it can fit in the machine just like I did last time. Alright, and I'm putting my plate on top here and rolling it through the machine, and as usual I have the die in at an angle. Alright, and I'm just cutting these excess pieces off because I know I won't ever use those tiny little pieces, but I probably, I might use the bigger chunk in the future for another project. And that's kind of what I like about Mosaic Moments is that it's pretty rare that I use up a whole sheet of pattern paper, and so I feel like you can save on pattern paper using our system because you don't necessarily want to cover the whole page with pattern paper. Again, there's some projects where I use it all, but that's pretty rare. Most of the time I don't end up using the whole thing. All right, so what I just showed was the 2x2 square die from set A, and I need 4 2x2 squares, and I could cut them each one at a time with the die from set A, but instead I'm using the grid die that creates 6 2x2 squares, although I only need 4. And I'm just placing them on the parts of the pattern paper that I want. Again, I want to show more of those deer heads, so I'm lining it up to make sure I can get them on my page and that I don't cut them in an awkward way. So that's what's nice about having the dies where you can see through them. So I know exactly what's going to be cut. So anyway, if you need to cut multiple 2x2 squares, again, you can use the 2x2 square die in set A, or if you have the 2x2 grid die, you can cut multiple at the same time. So this die certainly makes it a lot faster and easier to cut all those little squares because you get it in one cut and you're done. And I don't need to keep these squares in any particular order. Obviously, if you were going to do that, you'd want to make sure you kept them together, but I don't need to keep them in any particular order. So I just have my 4 squares here, and it was nice to get it all in one cut. So now I'm going to use the 1x2 die in set C. It's the smallest one in that set, and I'm using plaid paper, so for me when it comes to plaids and stripes, I want them to look even within my die cut shape. So I'm placing the die on the part I want, and I'm going to make sure the lines are at least somewhat even when I get it cut. And I have a piece of washi tape on the die for extra security because even though I'm using a magnetic plate, sometimes the die shifts on the paper and it doesn't get the part I really want or it looks crooked. So washi tape keeps it extra secure. I recommend always having washi tape if you're using any of the dies. Anyway, I rolled it through and I'm going to be cutting the same shape with the same paper 3 more times for my layout, and I think it looks really good. I like the plaid. So I'm going to finish up the rest of my cuts and be back in a second. I'm back, and now I'm using another pattern paper, and this is the 1x4 die from set D. So that is the orange set. Of course, you can see the die is orange. So I'm just picking a spot I would like to cut out. I mean, most of the paper looks the same, but I want to get it just right. And so I'm using my pair of scissors again to cut around this shape, and you can see how I'm using paper in this video that's been used already before. And again, that's why I like mosaic moments, because you can have the same piece of paper and use it for multiple projects, which I love, especially if you have a pattern paper you like so much and you want to use it on multiple pages. So I am using magnetic plate, like I've said, but for some reason, sometimes that magnet messes up and the die wants to move around in a spot I don't need it to be. So the washi tape, again, helps keep that die secure when your magnet's trying to turn your die around. So I got that piece, and for my page, I need to cut this shape twice. So I'm going to cut it again. I really like this holiday paper I'm using. They're all from Simple Stories. And there's so many great pattern papers out there. So we definitely enjoy being able to support many of these companies that create pattern paper, and many of them look really good on Mosaic Moments layouts. So if you don't have any photos to fill in the small spaces, it's a great way to use your pattern paper to fill them in instead, which is the case here. Usually at Christmas time, we don't necessarily get a lot of detail photographs and you're inside, so I usually make the pages simple, and pattern paper makes it pop a little bit more. Now I'm going to be using the 1x5 die from set E. So yes, I use every basic set from the bundle today, except I'm not going to be using the grid die. To keep it simple, I did choose a page pattern that did not use the grid die to keep things easy. And I'm just using the same steps as before. This is a plaid paper. Now this paper doesn't have, since they're going at an angle, they're not straight lined, so I'm not as picky about lining it up. Although I do want to make sure the pattern looks kind of straight when I put it on the page, but I wasn't too worried about putting washi tape on the die this time. So I have the first piece, and of course I'm going to need to cut it again since I'm mirroring my page pattern. Just getting my piece of paper ready here. All right, I'm going to line it up carefully and cut around it again. By the way, if you are following along, thank you so much. We love doing these kind of demos where you can follow along easier anyway, so that way you can become more comfortable using Mosaic Moments pages. We know, especially for those of you who are new, it can be a bit overwhelming. And if you really like this video and you haven't done so already, please go check out our basic course here on YouTube. That is a set of beginner videos you can follow along as well, and there's a link in the top right corner. So I showed this page pattern earlier, and I just wanted to remind you of what it looked like. And I'm going to be placing all the cardstock on pattern paper the same way you see here, plus I'm going to mirror it on the second layout. So I have 2 sheets of grid paper here. This is 12x12 Kale, and you can find it with the Harvest collection. You can buy it with the collection, or you can buy it separately if you only wanted the green color. And I also have my pink dispenser. It's the Herma Dotto dispenser. We talk about that a lot. It's our favorite repositionable glue. It does become permanent over time, and other repositionable glues don't seem to work as well because some of those pieces fall off, but the Herma brand does a really good job of becoming permanent, and actually the pieces do stay on your page for a very long time. We've had pages that are really close to becoming 20 years old, and they're still holding up really well, and that was using the same glue. So right now I'm just putting down my cardstock mats, and again the photos will go on top, and I'm just lining them up the same way it shows on my page pattern. So sometimes when you use a die machine, you may get these rough edges, and I'm not sure how well you can see it through the camera, so I apologize for that. But you can use this tool called the Adhesive Eraser. It's from Xyron, and we use a lot if we accidentally get glue on our photographs. It's a great tool for that, but you can use it to get rid of these rough sides on the die cuts. But I also, just a second ago, used a little chiseler, which some of you may have that if you use our matte knife and ruler. The little chiseler is great for hand cutting your photos, so you may have that tool as well. And so either one of those will work to get those rough edges off the cardstock blocks you cut with the dies. All right, now I'm just lining it up on my grid paper. So with these big blocks, you really just need to add glue in the four corners in the middle, and then I line it up carefully. Usually you want to put it right up in the left corner of the space you're going to place it, and you want to make sure the very top line and the line on the left are completely covered when you place these blocks. So if they're not completely covered, the nice thing about having the repositionable glue is you can pick it up and replace it or place it on the grid lines again. So that's really important when using the grid papers. Make sure those lines are covered, because when you see it later, you're going to be very annoyed that you can see the line. It happens to all of us. Now I'm putting on my pattern paper with the reindeer head. I just love that little reindeer with the lights hanging on in its antlers. And I have the two squares here that I made with the 2x2 grid die. And so I really like using pattern paper as the borders here. These spaces are really small, and I didn't have photos to really cover them up. And it makes a really nice design on the layout. Here are my two plaid pieces. I really liked a lot of the pattern paper, so I used this layout to show multiple of them clearly. I sort of like that it's this paper kind of reminds me of home. It has like a homey look, and we had Christmas at home this past year. I think this was for 2019. I don't remember which Christmas it was. I think it was 2019. And so I like this kind of paper because it feels very homey and very comfy, I guess. That's why I wanted to use it for my layout. Alright, so the first half of my layout is done, and now I'm going to mirror it on the other side. So when you're doing this, I recommend doing the side that matches the pattern, the page pattern you're looking at, and then it's easier to envision how it's supposed to mirror on the other side. The only thing I really switched around was the placement of the colors. I switched the two dark brown and the two light browns, because I prefer it to have asymmetrical look in that regard anyway. And everything else, it was really easy to see where to place it. So I usually always start with the bigger blocks first, because then it's easier to find where the little die cut spaces are supposed to go. Alright, I'm taking the same steps again. I'm just gluing my pieces down. So you can see I just placed where everything is supposed to go on the grid paper, and then I glued it down. I don't do that every time on my video, but that's usually because I have to switch back and forth between showing you how to cut the die and then placing it on the page, whereas you guys may be more likely to cut the mat and then directly place on the grid paper right after you cut it. But, you lay it out and do what's easiest for you. That's what I'm all about. Do what is easiest for you and do whatever your brain thinks best for yourself. Everyone's very different in how they process these things or process getting the layout put together. And a lot of times I remind you to take your time. I mean, we when you're scrapbooking, you want to enjoy the process anyway, so I definitely want you to enjoy it while you're making the pages. But make sure you take your time and make sure all those grid lines are getting covered. Again, with the repositionable glue, you can always pick it up and place it on again. And just enjoy putting it all together. When you have a lot of chaos in the holidays, it's nice to just have something in your life that doesn't feel so chaotic, right? So it's just nice to relax and focus on making a layout. And whether you decide to follow along this video or not, you are certainly welcome to scrap lift, is what they say, to copy what I'm doing now for your own page. I just wanted to make this easy for everyone and just show you guys how to make an easy layout you can create at home during a busy time. Alright, so the next step is to add the photos, so let's get started with that. So to cut my photos, I will be using the layering sizes, so I'm using my layering dies, and again, when you're organizing your dies, it makes it much easier to separate the dies that fit the grid measurements and then the layering sizes on a separate magnetic sheet. And I do recommend getting some sort of magnetic organizer when using these dies. We use the magnetic sheets from Stamp In Storage. So we have, like, out of all the organizers we used so far, that one seems to be our favorite. So I definitely recommend Stamp In Storage supplies. Alright, I just used the layering size for the 4x5 rectangle for this photograph here. So that makes it really easy. And everyone's brain, again, is different, so using the term layering is confusing to people because some people think the layers should be the one on the bottom, right? But we think of layering as the things you're going to place a layer on top. So the layering sizes are really smaller than the sizes that fit the grid because you're going to take that piece and layer it on top. So I hope that makes sense. Anyway, again, go check out our video about what are the layering dies if you're not familiar with them, but it's basically dies that are just a little bit smaller, so that way you can match your photographs, or I guess cut your photographs a little bit smaller to place it on top of your paper mat. So I just cut this one, and just a note, this die is very tight over 4x6 photograph, and I'm going to cut it again here, and you'll see it's right up against the border of the 4x6 die. And I've had a lot of practice and I'm using a magnetic plate, but I recommend, especially at the beginning, to double check, make sure that die is going to cut into the photograph itself and that you use washi tape to make sure that die does not shift when you're first starting out, especially. Like I said, I've had a lot of practice and kind of can recognize if the die is placed on the photo correctly or not. But at the beginning stages, I highly recommend getting out that washi tape and make sure your die is going to cut through your photograph properly, because when it's very close to the edge of the photo, it could easily cut it crooked or cut it a little bit too small or something like that. So you want to be extra careful with these dies that are very close to the edge of the size of your photo. Alright, so I'm going to put that layering die away, and now I'm going to use, since I used the square die before, the 4x4 square die, I'm going to use the layering die. So it's going to be in the same order as what you used before. So before I had the 4x4 square layering, or excuse me, the 4x4 die that fits the grid, and that was the second to largest one, right? And so I'm going to go to the layering set and also grab the second to largest layering die. And you can also compare. You can take your die and place it over the mat you just cut to make sure it's the layering size you want. But always double check, especially if you're new, make sure you have the right die you want to use. And again, this 4x4 square die is going to also be tight on a 4x6 photograph, so be extra careful. Still have to remember to flip over that plastic plate. But you want to make sure that the die is placed where you want it and that, again, it's going to cut your photograph properly. You can see that die goes right up to the edge of the photograph, so be extra careful. Last, I'm going to be using, now that I'm done with the square die, I'm going to be using the layering die from set B. So I'm going to put set A away and grab B here. So I used the second to largest die before, and so I'm going to do the same thing and grab the second to largest die from set B. I hope that all makes sense. You can always rewatch the video, or better yet, if you have any questions about the Mosaic Moment system or the basic die set or anything I brought up in this video, please ask them in the comments below. I love answering your questions, and I love seeing your comments as well. Alright, I'm going to cut through the machine here, and this die is a lot smaller than the other one, so you don't have to worry as much about it. You can tell that the die fits on the photo properly for the most part because it's a lot smaller. There's plenty of room for the 3x5 layering size on a 4x6 photograph, as you can see here. Alright, I just have to run this through the machine, and that was the last photograph I needed to cut, and so now I'm going to lay them on my page. So I haven't glued them down yet, but I figured out where I was going to place each one. So I do recommend before you get started on any Mosaic Moments layout to plan out where your photographs are going to go. You want to make sure your photos, the subjects, are going to fit in the space you would like. I do have a video about prepping for Mosaic Moments layouts, and I'll have the link in the top right corner here. So go check that out if you have been having a hard time planning your layouts. And I'm hoping to be able to make more prep videos because I know a lot of you want advice for the more advanced dies as well. So that should be coming in the future. But for now, just, especially if you're a beginner, just pick the simple page patterns to start with. And actually, I recommend starting out with 1 or 2 of our page kits to get started so you get familiar with lining up on the grid paper. And then once you do that and you're ready to get the basic bundle, I recommend just choosing, like I did today, just choose one page pattern, asymmetrical page pattern with the bigger blocks like this one, and then mirror it so you don't have to go searching for another page pattern yet. So that'll make it easier for you. So today I used a layout with bigger design spots, so that way it was easier for me to fit those 4x6 photographs. You know, a lot of you at the beginning have 4x6 photos where the photos are taken really up close, like people's portraits, because that's what we take most pictures of, is of people, right? And then later you'll get the better photo habits to do the fancy Mosaic Moments designs, but at the beginning, pick out the page patterns that look really easy and that will fit these closer up photographs, like this page pattern. Alright, so this is my finished layout, and I really like how it turned out. It looks really nice, fun and Christmassy, and again, very easy. We have reached the end of today's video, and I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I hope if you're going through a busy holiday time that this was kind of relaxing for you. Maybe you followed along because you just wanted to get a page done and relax, or maybe you're a beginner and you just want to get started and you feel overwhelmed. So hopefully this demo will help make that process easier for you. Anyway, if you guys enjoyed this video, let me know by giving it a thumbs up, and also, especially for those of you who are new, please subscribe so you can be updated on more future demos like this one. Anyway, I hope you guys have a wonderful holiday. Thank you so much for watching our YouTube channel. We love doing these demos for all of you. Anyway, I hope you have fun scrapping at home, and I will see you next time.